In part two of this talk on counterfeit freedom and salvation, I said you could just write the three words, slavery is evil, on a piece of paper, and that would be actually more pro-freedom than the Constitution. And I'm sure a lot of people would be bothered by that statement, but it's actually true for the reasons I explained in that talk, namely that the main purpose of the Constitution was actually to establish a new group of people to carry out taxation, which is actually a form of extortion. If you think it was established to protect people's freedoms, again, I would point out that the Bill of Rights are amendments to the Constitution, right? The Federalists weren't so interested in emphasizing individual rights. Folks like Patrick Henry were, and Gadsden as well. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this talk. I should have looked up his first name. It's escaping me right now. But the Gadsden flag, which you're probably familiar with, in recent times, it's gotten some press because there's been a big misinfo campaign by the left, which is really just what are known as the useful idiots of communists. So anytime you see the left, coming out in outrage against something, it's probably because the agents that they are following unknowingly want them to be against it. So the Gadsden flag recently has been demonized and made out to be, racist and pro-slavery and the usual, slander that the left applies to anything that the state wants them to. Again, unknowingly, they think they're actually being like true social justice warriors, but they're just furthering the Marxist cause. So the Gadsden flag also is really all you need, just like writing on a piece of paper, slavery is evil. The Gadsden flag is even better, actually, than that, because it includes the abuse of slavery and all other abuses, right? Don't tread on me is another way of saying don't abuse me, right? So the reason why that's actually all you need is because it aligns with the greatest commandments of Jesus, which are law, which is a law of comprehensive love, to love God, others, and yourself. And many Christians overlook this. A lot of Paulinist Christians, in particular, when the issue of like the law of God comes up, they're all too quick to like reference all of these, many dozens of different laws in Judaism, and say, we're not meant to be, legalists and be following each of these many laws. And it just makes me shake my head every time, because that's why, Jesus came to clarify the law for us, and he simplified it. And he said, the real law is just to love God, others, and yourself. That contains all of the law and all the teachings of the prophets. But they don't focus on that because they just want to be anti-law, even though Jesus said, that he would turn away from workers of lawlessness, evildoers. He said, I'll say I don't know you, you workers of lawlessness. So it is the perfect law, and it is all you need. And you could say, well, yeah, but who's going to enforce it, right? So there's this idea of like, we can't just say, love is the law, and, or the non-abuse principle is the law, and then just hope that everyone is going to obey it, right? So this is where some critical thinking needs to come in, right? Because that can seem like a smart reply, but it's actually not, right? Okay, so let's look at this carefully. Is setting up a group of extortionists to enforce a moral law on society better than not setting up a group of extortionists and hoping for the best that, most people will agree that abuse is bad, and for those that don't agree, people will respond with defensive force as appropriate. So there's this, just knee-jerk reaction of, well, of course we need to have, this strong central government, this federalized government, this strong power to enforce these laws. Otherwise, it would just be chaos. There wouldn't be any law and order of any kind. So this is actually a way of looking at the world, because if you understand what it is that we should all recognize as an evil, which is abuse, and then you think that setting up a group of people who can commit extortion 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and pretty much do whatever they want with that money and have no real repercussions. I mean, the idea that like voting once every 4 years actually has like a direct influence on what they do with your tax dollars, like that's just not accurate. That's, it just doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever to say, well, there are representatives because we get to vote for a politician once every 4 years. I mean, it just doesn't make sense on multiple levels. First of all, what if you vote for the politician that loses? Well, then you're obviously not being represented then. Or what if there's no politician on the ballot that you feel even comes close to representing you? Well, then you're still not being represented. Or what if you vote for a politician, he seems like he's going to do the right thing, and then he changes his mind. He, turns out he lied during the campaign, and now he's doing something different. Hasn't that happened here and in many other countries? Yeah, of course it has. So this idea that like we're just going to let them take money from us, under the threat of violence, right? Like if you don't pay, we're going to put you in a cage. And we're just going to, have a group of people do that, and then they're going to become incredibly powerful and wealthy. And we're going to have them be the ones that are going to protect us from abuses like extortion, right? Because extortion is a crime, right, for everyone except the people doing it all the time and on the largest scale. So returning to the Gadsden flag, don't tread on me. If that was actually as commonplace a sight, like if instead of American flags everywhere, we actually had Gadsden flags everywhere, that would be a more secure society, actually, because the principle is being highlighted, right? Don't abuse, right? It's the opposite of slavery. It's the opposite of being aggressive. It's the opposite of violence. It's a statement of nonviolence, saying, don't commit violence on me, right? Or I'll use proportional defensive force against you. So it's actually, again, in alignment with the greatest commandments of Jesus. And, just getting back to the logic of why the chances of things being better without setting up this group of extortionists would be better is, again, just think about it logically. You're not going to have this group that's getting funded automatically no matter what they do, right? You can say, oh, we can vote them out of office. Okay, well, again, you're just assuming that it's, well, first of all, say they start doing abuses, the first day in office. Oh, so for the next 4 years, we just got to take abuse because, that's the intelligent way to have a civilization and, social justice or whatever. Like, that doesn't hold up. Oh, we can impeach them. Yeah, okay. like these these supposed checks and balances are really pretty much a joke. And in any case, they're just going to be replaced by another politician who could just be doing exactly the same thing, and fundamentally are doing the same thing, which is claiming this power to abuse that is considered criminal for so-called ordinary people to do. Taxation just keeps getting overlooked as like just a necessary evil or something, or like, oh, it's just, what do they say? It's the, it's the cost of a civilized society. But that's just not true at all. It's a contradiction in terms. Extortion and civilized, as in like people being respectful towards one another, are in oxymoron. So if you find the idea of not endorsing abuse as a means to stop abuse somehow far-fetched or, utopian, I would just recommend thinking about that more carefully, right? And look at all of political history, look at all the continued corruption and, increasing totalitarianism going on. And recognize that just because it can say something on the Constitution doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to follow it either, right? Like the Second Amendment has just been violated more and more over the years. The Fourth Amendment has been violated countless times on a daily basis now with, all the surveillance, invasion of privacy, all the restrictions on free speech, all the censorship on media, violating the First Amendment. So even when it's, written on paper, then you're just trusting, oh, well, these extortionists, they're surely going to, follow it. They're not going to violate the Constitution, right? Because we can then appeal to the Supreme Court. Again, this kind of wishful thinking that we can always count on these checks and balances within the governing body to police itself, right? Like, why is that considered more likely to succeed than not having a setup like that in the first place, right? Clearly, not giving people basically free, endless money to do with as they please, regardless of whatever they do, and giving them the supposed authority to abuse in various ways that we don't, right? Like taxation being the prime example, but many other things government does that if a so-called ordinary person did, it would be considered criminal, medical tyranny being a prime example. If you were to coerce someone to take some drugs or put something on their body, that'd be considered criminal, right? If you were to go over someone's house and, take whatever weapons they had just because you had a suspicion that they might be a dangerous person or whatever, if you're disarming nonviolent people, that would be criminal. But it's not when they do it, right? So they're given this exception to the rule. And then we're supposed to think that that's actually going to make us safer. It's the complete opposite. So the best thing we could do is focus on the true law as given by the Messiah, and actually as, also expressed by the Gadsden flag, and have that be the focus, right? Instead of the government flag. I mean, also you got to consider, okay, how did those 50 stars come into place, especially the 50th, right? Like Hawaii didn't become a state voluntarily, right? That was just an act of aggression that took over that kingdom there. So, many other examples could be given, right? Just how all the territory was taken, genocide of Native Americans, right? So the idea that the best way to have a principled society is by setting up an unprincipled institution just doesn't add up. It never has and never will. So I hope some of this made sense. I hope I explained it in a decent enough way. All right, thanks for listening. I thought I should add a point because I imagine some folks are going to lean hard on me saying hope for the best. They're just going to roll their eyes and be like, he just thinks we should all hope for the best, and it will be chaos, and what good is that? Even though I did say that people could use defensive force themselves, right? That'll just be kind of skimmed over. So let me lean on that. Let me emphasize that so that, my words aren't, misconstrued, or my viewpoint isn't just made out to be something absurd. So there are things in the world known as private security firms, right? So this main blunder with the idea that we need government for these various services, like, why? Why do you need a group of extortionists to have security? Like, okay, we need roads. Why do you need extortionists to have roads? Like, you really think there just wouldn't be any roads in the world if there wasn't extortion going on? You really think there wouldn't be any security if there wasn't extortion going on? Like, militias wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be communities actually building their own roads, or people pulling their resources together to fix up roads in their area. Like, that just never would happen. There'd never be any kind of charity. There'd never be any kind of healthcare. None of these things would exist without extortion. It's like extortion, the great savior of the world, right? Like, what would we do without taxation? Because it's only taxation that makes the world a better place, right? No good can be done unless it's done via taxation, right? This is, the fallacy, this assumption that this is the only way. This is the only way that we can accomplish good in the world is through doing an evil, right? Through coercing people to give money, or just taking it straight out of their paycheck, or with every transaction, right? It's basically stealing money from people. That's the only way. It's just ridiculous to think that, like, an immoral act is the way to have a moral society. And then on top of that, to assume that the people doing the stealing are going to do the best thing with the money they just stole. Like, it's just assumption on top of assumption. It's just ridiculous. So with that added clarification, I'll leave it there.